Hello everybody, welcome to my webinar on well placement tools, methods and implementation. Okay, the agenda, the topics that I will be talking about today start with an overview on well placement and the components involved. Then I will discuss well placement workflow and some details on how well placement components are incorporated in the workflow. The discussion will continue with the topic of well placement methods. I will talk a little bit about different well placement methods and how these methods are differing from each other. And finally, I will touch upon how well placement planning and execution can be done successfully. I would like to acknowledge that the core material of this presentation, particularly the pictures, have been taken from the book Well Placement Fundamentals by Roger Griffith. But what is well placement? Well placement is a kind of landing an airplane on a runway which is moving up and down and hidden in the fog. In analogy, airplane is the well. The pilot is the well placement team involved in the well placement process. The bumpy runway is the target layer or the sweet zone in a reservoir. And the fog is the uncertainties such as geological uncertainties, real-time measurement uncertainties, so on and so forth. Before I proceed with the presentation, I should mention that the terms well placement and geosteering are sometimes used interchangeably in the context of well placement. In addition, the term well placement used in the context of reservoir engineering has nothing to do with this presentation today. Before diving into details about well placement, I would like to talk a little bit about what is return on investment and how well placement can lead to maximizing return on investment when it comes to drilling a well. There are three ways to increase the return on investment, generally speaking. The first method is called reduced cycle time. It means earning income faster, and it focuses on taking advantage of the time value of money. The second method is reduction of costs in order to gain the same earning income. And finally, this last method focuses on the increase of revenue and profit. Now the question is how well placement can help us to maximize the return on investment when we drill a well. The key to maximize reserves recovery in well placement of a well in the reservoir is such that it produces hydrocarbon for the longest possible time and drains the formation as completely as possible. By accessing pockets of untapped formation, such as attic oil at the top of the reservoir, and by avoiding unwanted fluids, a well can finally deliver the maximum return on investment. And this is actually achieved by delivering the maximum possible hydrocarbon volumes with a minimum associated water production and unwanted gas production. Well placement improves both the long-term and short-term performance of a well. These are some of the benefits associated with a successful well placement. In a case of successful well placement, we can ensure that we deplete the reservoir faster because the well has been placed in the best part of the reservoir. When you place your well in the best part of the reservoir, it is most probably in the most porous zone, so you'll get a higher RP. The higher the RP, the lower the costs. You can avoid sidetracks, and there is also a chance of reduction of intervention. So all these are kind of linked to the reduction of costs. And finally, by a successful well placement, you can ensure that you have a higher and longer hydrocarbon production and delayed onset of water. So these are all short-term and long-term effects that a well placement can have on a successful well. This figure schematically shows you that a well tool that has been placed using well placement ensures that we get a short-term and long-term return on investment, and we actually try to maximize the return on investment using well placement in well 2 compared to well 1. We said that well placement process aims for maximizing the return on investment, but it's important to know that well placement process is an interactive approach. It's an interactive approach to well construction, combining technology, people, and the objective is to deliver optimally placed well in a given geological setting. And the final objective is to maximize production or injection performance of the drilled well. So there are 3 components involved in a well placement process: the software and IT, the downhole tools, and people and processes. Software and IT and downhole tools are all technology, and they are all used by the people and processes involved. The software and IT tools which are used are normally employed for visualization, interpretation, data transformation, data processing, and so on. And by downhole tools, we mean drilling technology like RSS in drilling, directional drilling, and LW technology, which is used for data acquisition in real time. The well placement team consists of well placement people. The people involved consist of well placement team, the client geoscientists and drilling people, the drillers, directional drillers, and so on. So there are a lot of other people with different background from the asset owner's office and the service provider's office who get together in order to use these technology here to provide the desired service, which is a successful well placement. The key point here is that the effective interaction between the asset owner's representative down here and the well placement team in the service provider's office is of great importance in a successful well placement operation. But that's fair enough to mention this here, and I'll elaborate on this as we proceed in the next slides. The cycle shown here is a well-known cycle in the lifetime of the field, and well placement workflow is a kind of incorporated in the process of well planning, well construction, and post-drilling evaluation. The first step in the well placement process is known as pre-job modeling, and this is a part of the pre-job planning in the well planning process. And we all know that the well planning process consists of project planning and pre-job planning. So the first step of well placement, log response modeling or pre-job modeling, is a part of the pre-job planning in the well planning process. In this first step of well placement, the pre-job modeling is done. A formation model is actually made, and then the response of different logging tools, LW tools, are forward modeled along the planned trajectory in the model. The second step of well placement process is known as the execution phase, which is a part of the well construction process. Here, the real-time logging data and drill trajectory are streamed into the modeling software, which is shown here. They're analyzed by the well placement team, and the recommendation for steering the well is given to the people involved. And finally, the last step of the well placement process is to finalize the subsurface model interpretation along the drill trajectory. And it uses all the data acquired while drilling. So it's a post-job processing of the data and modeling of the data. The final version of this model can be then used as an input to the reservoir model update. So the next topic is well placement methods. In short, there are three methods of well placement. Method one is called model compare update, and it uses conventional non-azimuthal LWD tools. Method two is known as real-time deep determination, and it employs azimuthal imaging tools. And finally, there is a third method called distance to boundary, and it uses boundary mapping technologies for ultra deep azimuthal resistivity tools. The first method, model compare update. In the pre-job planning phase of this method, which is shown here, first the structural model is built. This is the structural model which is built, and this model is then populated with the formation properties from some offset wells around the planned well. And finally, the theoretical log responses are forward modeled along the planned trajectory. The next step is actually part of job execution, and it is known as real-time modeling. And in this step, the data, the real-time data, is streamed into the modeling software. And then these data, which are shown in different colors, are compared with the forward model logs in red color here. Actually, what you're looking for here is just to see if the forward model and the measured logs are comparing well with each other or not. As in the case shown here, this reveals that the geological model and the location of the trajectory within the formation are consistent with what is actually occurring downhole. So there is no need to change the model formation here. So what we see here in the model formation seems to be what we have downhole. The real-time trajectory and log data are streamed into the forward modeling software, as I mentioned. And as shown here, a difference between the modeled logs and the real-time measured logs are detected. This means that when formation model, the formation model needs to be updated to represent more accurately the real formation downhole. But before updating the formation model, we need to make sure that what actually accounts for the difference between the modeled and the measured logs. Can it be, let's say, bad measured logs? Is there any problem with the tools? Can it be due to local unexpected geological features, like the diagenesis, which are very common in carbonates? Is it due to the change in the formation depth? Is it because of the change in the formation thickness? Can it be due to, for example, facing subseismic fault and getting into a fault zone, for example? It might be due to lateral changes in the formation properties, and so on. So that there are lots of reasons that can account for the difference between the modeled and measured logs as shown here. This is where geosteering and well placement become a kind of art of real-time subsurface structure interpretation. And it is done actually by reconciling different sources of real-time data, the pre-existing knowledge of the field, and the LWD data interpretation in order to make a smart decision in terms of how to steer the well in order to maximize the return on investment and actually stay in the target zone. In the cases illustrated here, after analysis of real-time data, it turned out that the model formation depth needs to be adjusted in order to get a match between the model and the measured logs. And you can see it on the next slide. So you see that the depth of the formation is changed in the model formation model here, and then we get a good match between the measured and the model logs. So I go to the previous slide and then come back, and you can see how this happens. So after applying this adjustment to the formation depth, in this case, a slight increase in the formation depth, the well trajectory crosses layers which actually cause a better match between the modeled and measured logs. And that's how it really happens. The process that I mentioned in the previous two slides is actually an iterative process of modeling of two responses, and it recurs in the process of well placement. This iterative process of modeling two responses along the drill trajectory within the model formation, comparing the real-time data with the model data, updating the formation model in order to get a match between the modeled logs and the real time, it recurs while drilling. So that the position of the well trajectory in the layers can be changed in order to make sure that the well stays in the target layer. And you see that this is our target layer here, and at the end of the day, after updating the model and giving instructions how to steer the well, we make sure that the well stays in this target layer shown here. It doesn't get out of the reservoir target layer. That's actually the final objective of well placement, which is achieved here. On this figure, as it's shown, following geometric well planning design will end in drilling the well geometrically according to the original plan. This can lead to much less reservoir exposure and finally less production. In this case, for example, 40 feet of this well has been drilled in an undesired formation, let's say in this overlaying shale interval here. Although well placement is a very complex process, especially the model compare update method, but it has proven to be very effective in successful placement of hundreds or even thousands of horizontal wells around the world in the last 15 years at least. However, this technique has its own limitations. So we'll move to method 2, which is real-time depth determination, while talking about the limitations of model compare update method. Let's say you have an average measurement which shows a change in the value. It is often ambiguous what is happening in real time. When you see a change in an average measurement like this. In the case shown here, for example, the average real-time density porosity drops here, but we don't know, we cannot really say what is the cause for the drop. Is it due to lateral change in the reservoir properties, or is it due to formation, for example, drilling up structure or down structure? This change in the average porosity can actually be due to any of the scenarios shown here. It can be due to drilling up out of a bed, like here. It can be drilling down out of a bed, or it can be penetrating lateral changing the lithology while still you're in the pay zone. Average log measurements have no directional sensitivity. That's the problem. That's why it is not possible to understand which of these scenarios actually are happening here and has led to the change in the reservoir in the average density porosity here. The same would be true if we had gamma ray, conventional resistivity, or sonic measurements, because all these measurements are average conventional measurements. The question is what can help us to distinguish the direction from which features like the shale layer here on this figure approaches the borehole. Is it approaching from above the borehole? Is it approaching from below the borehole? Or it's due to pinching out of the reservoir rock here and we get into a shale layer after the pinch out? The short answer to this question is using azimuthal log measurements. Azimuthal log measurements may be extremely helpful in understanding the reason for the change in the average formation properties. So that's where azimuthal log imaging tools come in, and we can use them in a method of well placement which is known as real-time depth determination in order to understand what's really happening around the borehole. Well, azimuthal measurements are actually measurements which are focusing to a sector of the wellbore rather than the average around the borehole. They provide the information which is required to distinguish the direction from which features approach the borehole. In this figure shown here, at the top you can see a well which penetrates through a given stratigraphy. At the bottom here, the corresponding image log acquired along this drilled hole is shown. The image actually shows a succession of sinusoids that provide us with information regarding how we're drilling with respect with this bedding here. In other words, the azimuthal measurements presented in terms of an image down here provide information required to distinguish the direction from which features approach the borehole. So the image log can help us to understand these features, which can be, for example, some happy faces or sad faces. And this can help us to understand if these features approach the borehole from bottom due to drilling down stratigraphy, if they're approaching the wellbore while drilling parallel to a bedding, or if they approach the borehole from top while drilling up stratigraphy. Now that we've explored the value of azimuthal tools in geosteering or well placement, we should be ready to move to the next well placement technique, which is using the boundary mapping technology, third method. But before that, I would like to have a look at the main limitations of azimuthal and conventional average log measurements, which is actually the driver for developing the boundary mapping technology. Conventional average logs have depths of investigations ranging from inches to a few feet. That's something we all know. These logs can be used in model compare update, as I mentioned in the previous slides. they have a big limitation, which is their lack of azimuthal sensitivity. On the other hand, we have conventional imaging logs, such as density and resistivity images, which are effectively used in real-time beep determination technique, the second technique that I explained in the previous slides. But the problem with these tools is that they can only detect the boundary once the borehole has come into contact with that boundary. This is due to shallow depths of investigation of these measurements, which are limited to order of inches. So let's say you have a propagation resistivity tool, which has a, let's say 4 feet of depth of investigation. It doesn't have azimuthal sensitivity. It can only be used in the model compare update technique. We have conventional azimuthal imaging tools like density image that provides you with the ability to do real-time deep estimation, but it is not deep enough to see too much beyond the wellbore that you're drilling. The distance to boundary well placement technique, which is the third technique, uses logging technology, which both have ultra deep depths of investigation, which may reach to tens of meters, and azimuthal sensitivity to the environment around the borehole within these depths of investigation. So it's much deeper than the conventional resistivity tools, let's say, and it has the advantage of having azimuthal sensitivity, which we see only in the conventional imaging tools. So that's the technology which is used in the distance to boundary well placement method. The development of deep directional electromagnetic propagation tools has revolutionized well placement by facilitating remote detection of resistivity changes within a formation. The ultra-deep azimuthal resistivity tools, known as UDAR, are able to map the remote boundaries, as it is shown schematically here, across which formation conductivity changes considerably. This can happen across bed boundaries, fluid contacts, let's say oil water contacts, which can be tens of feet away from the borehole. So that's how this technology helps us to see too far beyond the borehole and take advantage of these mapped boundaries around the borehole. One of the key capabilities of remote boundary detection technology is early warning of changes in the formation deep. This figure shows a schematic of a well drilling off stratigraphy in the reservoir. As clear, there is a deficit angle between the well and the formation, which is shown here. A conventional propagation resistivity measurement with a depth of investigation of around 1 meter is able to detect this approaching formation boundary when the tool is about 1 meter below the reservoir top. Given the deficit angle between the well and formation and very short distance between the beat and reservoir top, there is a high chance of penetrating the undesirable overlaying shale. So if you take action here, it's already late. Although you have taken an action, you cannot steer your well in a way to stay in the reservoir. You will finally get into the undesirable shale formation. So that happens because you have detected this boundary very late. But if you have, if you assume that you have an ultra deep azimuthal resistivity tool in the same BHA, and in the same place where your propagation resistivity tool was placed. It can detect the boundary when the tool is about 5 meters below the boundary. So this number can be even more. It can be 10 meters or 15 meters, but 5 meters is a fair enough deep depths of investigation when we compare it to the conventional resistivity tools. In this case, although there is a similar deficit angle between the well and the formation, there is enough room for us to make a trajectory adjustment. So we take a trajectory adjustment here, and that happens where we are far away from the boundary here, and then we finally can steer in a way to stay in the reservoir and do not get into this undesirable shale above the reservoir. This comparison may actually convey a wrong message, that the ultra-deep azimuthal resistivity tools are always superior to conventional propagation resistivity tools. But this is not really plausible. There are cases where ultra-deep azimuthal resistivity tools are of no use. And model compare update and real-time deep estimation techniques, which employ conventional tools only with less depths of investigations, are more effective and promising. This is an extremely important discussion with ton of details, which is beyond the scope of this webinar. But the message that I would like to convey here is that with the advent of ultra-deep azimuthal resistivity tools and many success stories that are prompted particularly by the vendors, the value of model compare update and real-time deep estimation techniques has been faded away. The fact that I would like to stress on this on here is that ultra-deep azimuthal resistivity tools are extraordinary with a defendable track record, but they are not always feasible. That's the bottom line. This technology is sometimes recommended to be used in conjunction with model compare update and real-time deep estimation techniques to ensure more robust and reliable well placement process. Hopefully, you will now have a reasonable feeling for the main components and methods of well placement, and I hope that this has prompted many questions in your mind. But you should be aware that what I present in this webinar is just a kind of skimming over the topic of well placement or geosteering. There are so many detailed and interesting topics that were not covered, as they are beyond the scope of this webinar and the time that we have here. But let's talk a little bit about the successful well planning and execution of the well placement process. For sure, what was covered in this webinar does not provide you with the knowledge required for a successful planning and execution of geosteering operations. But referring to the slide on the well placement components, I stressed on the fact that the effective interaction between asset owner or asset owner's representative and well placement team in the service provider's office is a key factor in a successful well placement operation. That's an important point that I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation. So we have the asset owner and the service provider, which are interacting with each other within the well placement workflow, and these two actually are a part of the components involved in the well placement process. The key factor that plays an important role in this interaction is the knowledge of technologies used in the well placement process, such as LWD tools, directional drilling technology, IT tools, and well placement techniques. details about well placement techniques, how they compare and how they are superior to each other in different cases and so on, and what are the pros and cons of each of these techniques or methods. This knowledge is never fully transferred to the asset owner due to many reasons, actually, such as sales and marketing considerations. It can be due to lack of communication between the asset owner and the service provider. It can be due to the fact that the asset owner is not really willing to get this information. And there can be lots of other reasons or a combination of these reasons. So there is often a big gap between service provider's knowledge and the asset owner's knowledge, which can easily lead to a poor service quality. And finally, it can lead to failure of the whole well placement operation. But the question here is how to fill this gap. So this is a gap which I have observed at least in the last 13 years that I've been involved in this in different positions, in well placement position, in different positions in well planning, in the asset owner's office, and so on. The question that has always been there is that how to fill this gap. So this gap is not really filled, even if you have a lot of interaction between the asset owner and service provider. You need some knowledge to gain before, as an asset owner, you need to gain some knowledge on how to interact properly with the service provider in order to get as much information as possible about these technologies when there is a well placement operation. There is a well placement planning, execution, and post-job processing. So another part of the knowledge which is shared between asset owner and service provider is the geology of the field. That's the knowledge which you can find mainly in the asset owner's office, but it is normally fully transferred to the service provider throughout the pre-job modeling and also during the execution of well placement process. Actually, to fill this gap between the knowledge between the knowledge of service providers and the asset owners, we in PetroTeach offer a practical course which will be taught by me. The course is entitled Geosteering Fundamentals, Planning and Implementation, and this is intended as a course for somebody to develop the insights required for an effective engagement and contribution to a successful well placement process. The course will cover a diverse array of case studies and examples to consolidate your understanding in order to get a handle on an effective communication with well placement teams in the service provider's office. We'll try to ensure that you will acquire the basic knowledge required for effective engagement in well placement operations, to understand what the vendors offer you and how to help asset owners to maximize the return on investment, how to assess the technical solutions provided by the vendors. For example, the technologies which are offered in the pre-job planning phase, such as LW technologies and drilling strategy, which is offered in the pre-job planning phase, and also recommendations for how to steer the well during the operations. So this course will help you to understand all these things, how to communicate with the service provider, and if you're in the service provider office, how to communicate with the client in order to ensure a successful well placement operation. You will learn how to aggregate or reconcile real-time data from different resources and how to evaluate them how to communicate your understanding and ideas with people involved in the well placement process. And in addition, the course will provide you with practical tips and tricks which can be used in the planning and execution of well placement process. For sure, these tips and tricks have not been written in any books and cannot be found in any online resources either. So with that, we can go ahead and take questions if you have any.